All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome, and thank you all for joining us for the first SLA CID webinar for 2015. My name is Zina Applebaum, and I'm the chair of the CI division, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our webinar sponsor, Aurora WDC. Without them, our webinars would not be possible, so a big shout out to Aurora and thank you for that. Second of all, as Karen goes through her presentation, we will be accepting questions, which I will direct to her at the end of the session. Please use the dialog box in the chat window, and I will direct those questions to Karen. Early bird registration and housing for the annual conference is now open. Those of you that are looking to take advantage of the early bird pricing, please go ahead and do that. And finally, sit back and relax. Hot up the heels of our leadership summit, I thought it was fitting that I invited Karen to join us for the Competitive Intelligence Division to share with our members what she shared with the leadership group in Baltimore a few weeks ago. I think her thoughts on leadership, her thoughts on what SLA is all about, will help get us all in the mindset of preparing for 2015 and embracing the year with confidence, with leadership, and with an interest in getting involved. That said, I'll tell you a little bit about Karen. Karen is the Senior Information Standards Specialist in the Standards Coordination Office at the National Institute for Standards and Technology. Previously, she ran her own consulting firm for a 2-year period, and prior to which, Karen worked for 24 years in corporate information centers. She spent 14.5 years as a senior manager responsible for information research, competitive intelligence, and knowledge management functions with Bureau Veritas Consumer Product Services, a global conformity asset firm. She is a long-standing and active member of the Special Libraries Association, where she has held a position on the board of directors, was a founding member and the first chair of both the CI divisions and knowledge management divisions, so of course, very near and dear to our hearts. And Karen recently finished a term as SLA's Public Relations Advisory Council chair. She's currently the chair of the Leadership and Management Division, and Karen is also a candidate for SLA President-elect. So we are in good hands here today learning about leadership and learning about what SLA can do for us. Without further ado, Karen, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Zina, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's great to be here. As Zina said, I am Karen Resnick, and I am here to talk to you about SLA 101. I want to tell you, years back, I was at a leadership summit, and I remember a lot of the European chapter folks saying, you know, what are these chapters and what are these divisions? I guess in Europe, if you say chapters, they tend to think of the Hells Angels, so they were very confused by our terminology. And ever since then, I've had this desire to want to do a sort of SLA 101 that kind of explain the workings of the association. So I got the opportunity this leadership summit to put something together, and as Zina mentioned, she asked me if I'd be willing to share that again. I'm thrilled to do that. So basically, our agenda is I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of SLA and how it's organized. I'm going to talk about what does it mean to be a leader and leading a unit. I want to talk about how do you advocate change in the association, a little bit about what's it like to be on the SLA Board of Directors or to run for the board, and really why you should step up and volunteer and be a leader. There definitely is a lot in it for you. So I do have a little bit of a disclaimer. I just want to make clear that I tend to be very open and honest and frank, so these are my opinions. And also I decided to use a little bit of cartoons in my presentation, and I made sure that they were all licensed, except there was one I couldn't figure out, so I made sure I made their copyright notice in big letters. So research has shown that people who volunteer tend to be more engaged. And I would say thank you for those of you who have volunteered and stepped up and work with SLA. SLA has a great staff, but without all the hard work of all the volunteers that make up the divisions and the chapters and the committees and the board, we really wouldn't be able to accomplish everything that we do as an association. So it really is very important to have the interaction and engagement of the volunteers. So what you see in front of you is an attempt at an organizational chart. I have to be honest, this was not easy to do. It took me several hours to even try and get it down on paper, and even then I had to go over it with SLA staff and the past and current president of SLA to make sure I got it right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and walk you through this, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the committees and the councils. So if you see at the top, we basically start with the SLA membership. The SLA membership elects the SLA Board of Directors, and then the Board of Directors is responsible for overseeing the rest of the organization. So I'm going to move to the right. So reporting to the Board of Directors is the SLA Executive Officer. And reporting to the SLA Executive Officer are the SLA staff, of which now there are only 11. So there's quite a few reduction in staff over the years, and we just have a small number of people doing a very monumental job. Now, most people don't realize this, but the SLA advisory councils actually report to the SLA staff. They're there to support the staff. Now, let's go back to the SLA Board of Directors. So what you see under that is you see the SLA committees. So unlike the councils, the committees are there to support the work of the board. A little bit to the left, I want to point out the joint cabinet. So joint cabinet is the bringing together of the chapter cabinet and the division cabinet. And what that is the chapter cabinet is made up of the chapter officers. That would be the president and the president-elect for each chapter, comprises the chapter cabinet, and then we have the division cabinet, which is made up of the chairs and chairs-elect of all the divisions. And as you know, many of the divisions have sections, and the chapters also now, passed in the recent bylaws votes, can have caucuses, and these tend to be geographically based caucuses, which is why they're under the chapters. So that's sort of the structure of how the chapters and divisions come together. They meet at joint cabinet, and that joint cabinet is responsible to the Board of Directors. In between there you see the caucuses. The caucuses are basically these sort of special interest groups that forms. They're not really divisions yet, or they're not, so they're just a sort of fledgling group where they're trying to explore how do they come together. Off to the left of the SLA Board of Directors, we see the Board of Directors task forces. So what happens is every now and then the board decides there's a need to do something specific that wouldn't fall into a committee, and they'll create a task force. The most recent example of these is there's something what's called the Membership Preference Task Force that was headed by James Manasco, and that report is available. If you look at the last couple of Board of Directors minutes from SLA, you can see the full task force reports and their recommendations. Now, I certainly don't want to not mention the fellows. I want to tell you who the SLA fellows are. And they are part of the membership, but the reason they're brought out on this chart is they are an organized group. A fellow is an award given by the association to somebody generally in the middle of their career who is being recognized for their contributions to SLA, as well as what they're expecting to be future contributions to SLA. So when you're given a fellow award, it's expected that you're going to continue to be active. The reason they're an organized group is not only do they have their own business meeting, but they often, every year for many years, have sponsored the Fellows First Timers reception to welcome the first timers. And the last couple of years, they have been putting on a program at annual conference called the Fellows and Rising Stars panel. So the Fellows are a very important group in the organization, and I didn't want to leave them off. I do want to mention that there is an SLA board liaison that does liaison with every chapter and every division. So on the next slide, I just want to go a little bit more into the committees. So as we mentioned before, the SLA committees are responsible to the SLA board, and you see we have multiple committees on awards, bylaws, governance, etc. There is a staff liaison and a board liaison that sits on every single committee. The councils, as noted, report into the SLA staff. They're there to help the staff do their work, and you can see the various councils that are out there. And likewise, there is a staff liaison and a board liaison that sits on every council. So I think that gives you a great concept of how the organization is structured. I know there was a lot of excitement when I put this slide up. People would like to see the slides on the website because I think we all understand there's all these different groups within SLA, but it's not always obvious how they all come together. So the question is, what does it take to be a leader? And what does it take to be a leader in SLA? So obviously it takes more than having 13 people to be a leader on 13 people following you on Twitter to be a leader, but obviously you don't really need 13 people following you to be a leader. So what is it like leading an SLA unit? Well, let's be honest, in order to even become a leader of an SLA unit, you basically have to volunteer. That's the very first step, is stepping up and saying, you know, I really want to help, I want to take the reins, and then you get elected. A lot of the chapters and divisions these days don't have true elections. They have trouble finding volunteers, so they present a slate. So sometimes it's really just saying, I'm interested in stepping up, and there you go, you're now in charge. It helps to have a vision or have some idea or be very passionate about your unit or what you'd like to accomplish in SLA. And as I mentioned, I don't really think it's necessary to have a Twitter account. But so really, what is it like to lead a unit in SLA? Well, unfortunately, it is often cleaning up other people's messes. I have to be upfront with you that one of the biggest things I see as a challenge of being a leader in SLA is the constant turnover. We elect new officers every year, so people are always rolling off the board and new people are rolling on. And some years you have a great leader and some years you don't have a great leader. So not every president or chair is inspiring or hardworking, but a lot of them really are. So then you have those volunteers that didn't really realize that when they said they were willing to volunteer that you actually wanted them to do something. And then there's that third kind of volunteer who says that they're going to do something but never quite get around to doing it. So how do you handle this? So what are some tips for actually leading a unit? Well, find those volunteers. Now, I have heard over and over again, oh, it's so hard to find volunteers, it's very difficult to get people to step up. Well, my suggestion here is, first of all, reach out to the people you know. I was recently, when I stepped up to be chair of the Leadership and Management Division, I had a lot of positions to fill. We had a lot of committee chairs and no committee members, and I felt that that wasn't really a great way to go. We wanted to get some more active volunteers, so I literally emailed a bunch of people that I knew and said, are you interested in volunteering? I got a lot of responses. I also went and I looked at the people who had won awards. I looked at the Rising Stars, I looked at the Fellows, I looked at different people, and I wrote a few of them, figuring, you know, what do they tell you? If you want something to get done, ask a busy person. And a fair number of those stepped up as well. And lastly, I even just put a call out to the division list and said, is anybody interested in volunteering? Here's the job, here's the task, here's how much time it will take, and I managed to get a lot more volunteers as well. The second I would suggest, if you are indeed volunteering to be on a committee, a council, or lead a unit, is keep focus. Work on one or two key objectives. Don't try to tackle too much. Really, if you want to get something done, you've got a year as chair or a president of a unit. Focus on one or two things and make that happen. Don't reinvent the wheel. SLA has been around for 100 years or more. A lot of stuff has been done and documented. Nobody coming into office or stepping into a role should have to start from scratch. So there's a couple of places. Many units have their information on what we're calling the old wiki, where you can find documented procedures, examples of email templates. There's something called the SLA Unit Idea Bank, where you can go and look at ideas that different people have submitted. And if you don't have this where in the organization, you know, the structure or the committee or the unit that you're in, I would highly suggest that somebody start documenting it. You don't want nobody new coming in and having to figure out, you know, how do I send out a notice for a nomination. My next tip for you is to delegate, 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 delegate. It does help to have a lot of those volunteers in which to delegate, but the more that you can spread the work around, the more that you can give one task to one person and another task to another person, the less that any one single person has to do and the more you can accomplish. When you're leading a unit, you need to be setting direction and vision and keeping people on track. You can't, as a leader, do everything yourself. So it's really important to rely on those people who have volunteered to be committee chairs or to be on your board and use them. Also, when you're leading a unit, it's really important to communicate to the membership. Let them know what you hope to do in the year. Let them know what your groups are doing during the year. I think that too many leaders are silent and don't do enough communication about what's really going on. And the last is hold people accountable. I mean, how many times have we had somebody step up to take a role and then they just don't deliver? It's very hard, but you want to be able to give people an out. So I do want to make reference to the SLA Leadership Code of Responsibility. This was developed in 2003, and I was actually on the board and helped to develop this. And it wasn't so much to hold people's irons to the fire as it was to give them a graceful out. If somebody's taken on a role and they just can't do it, then you need to call them up and say, hey, you know, I really need you to do this, but I understand if you're just too busy at work or you just got other personal issues going on, you know, maybe you want to step down, or maybe I should give the task to somebody else. So, but you got to hold people accountable, because otherwise it just won't get done. So if you got somebody not delivering, my suggestion is you offer them the option to step down gracefully or to give the task to somebody else. The longer you go without getting it accomplished, then the more it hurts your unit or your division. So I want to talk to you a little bit about advocating change. We talked about SLA is a member organization, and that really is a big part of it. I'm going to share with you another comic strip. Unfortunately, this is something that often happens when you get a large group of people together and you try to make a decision. You're often struck with a massive wave of indecision. So what do? Well, let's remember, again, SLA is primarily a member-driven volunteer organization. But that also means that you are a member and you have a say. So if you're concerned about an SLA policy, you know, what do? What if you have questions regarding the way the board is practicing a certain issue? Maybe you have an idea how to make things better, which is what we really would like. But I think we all know sometimes people are resistant to change. But my personal feeling is all ideas are good, and we should definitely get them out there. So let's talk about that. So let's say you have an idea. You want to present something as a member and you want to make it sort of influence change in the organization. How do you move that proposal forward? Well, one of the easiest ways to do this is to utilize your unit to put forth an idea or a recommendation. A great example of this was the Kentucky chapter. So a couple years back, the Kentucky chapter members got an idea about redoing the SLA dues structure. Now this is a big deal, right? We're going to change how we charge people for their membership. So what did they do? They wrote a recommendation, and they brought that recommendation to the chapter cabinet, right? So they're a chapter, their unit leaders brought their recommendation for the Kentucky chapter to the chapter cabinet. The chapter cabinet voted to pass their recommendation, and then it went to the joint cabinet. So now the divisions gets involved, and they get to hear the recommendation. There's debate, there's a motion, there's a discussion. And in this instance, the division cabinet also approved the recommendation. So once the cabinet at the joint cabinet level approves a recommendation, it then goes to the board of directors to consider the recommendation. So in the case of the dues structure, restructuring, the SLA board received the recommendation from the cabinet, and they also voted to approve it. Then, because this was indeed a dues structure change, it had to go to the entire membership for a vote, and it did, and it passed. So I always like to say the Kentucky chapter is a poster child for how do you move an idea forth throughout SLA's processes. How else do you move a proposal forward? Well, tell somebody, and here in this case, tell the president-elect that you're interested in serving. The president-elect, before they start their year as president, is responsible for, believe it or not, appointing everybody on those SLA committees and those SLA advisory councils. I helped Cindy Romaine one year when she had to fill those slots. There's a lot of slots to fill. So if you're interested in getting more involved or bringing ideas forth, one of the better ways to do that is to step up and get yourself on a committee or a council. Even better, tell somebody that you want to be on the board. So the nominating committee is always looking for people to step up for the roles of the different board directors, the treasurer, the president-elect. You can self-nominate. There's lots of ways to get involved. So we did talk about that board process, right? So it's very hierarchical. You need to move things up from a member to a unit, to the cabinet, to the board, you need to bring things through a committee or to a council, to the board. There are some tips on how to get through this process. I think the very, very first one is to build consensus. So if you have an idea, like the Kentucky chapter, you really need to engage other people and other people in the membership of SLA to see if they're on board with your idea. And so build that consensus. See if there's a large group of people who sort of agree with you. Then you need to go about following that governance chain of command and all those processes, and yes, unfortunately, official parliamentary procedure. If you've been at any of these more official SLA meetings, we definitely have some members who are very well versed in parliamentary procedure, and they will make sure to keep everybody on task. The next important thing is to be focused on the issues, right? I know that SLA at a whole, there are a lot of different issues, but we tend to get off topic and we tend to get sort of tangential. Stay focused on what the issue is. And likewise, nobody likes to hear people complain about problem after problem after problem. If you think there's a problem, the best way to deal with it is to offer solutions. Lastly, stay professional. There has been a lot of years, over the years, where people get very, very heated. I like to give a very sad example of some of the SLA presidents. Several of them have told me how they repeatedly get hate mail. And everyone's like, well, that's sort of understandable. But I have to tell you, one president was actually spit on by a member. I mean, that's not professional. And you're probably wondering what was the topic. It was the SLA name change many years ago when they were considering Ask Pro. And I can understand people being upset about the process, about how the system was working, but you know, to be so unprofessional just doesn't serve anybody any benefit. So I like to show the next slide to remind people that when you are speaking up and when you feel very strongly about an issue, think about it before you speak and make sure that it's true. Is it going to be helpful to offer what you have to say? Is it really necessary to say these things? And can you do it in a kind way? So I want to talk to you a little bit about why you should run for the board. And I realize that that's actually written wrong. There shouldn't be a question mark. But why should you run for the board? Well, one reason is you might get hooked, right? So you might have stepped up to be a leader, you might be on a committee, you might be running a unit, and now you found that you really like it. You know, it's great to meet people and to work together and to make a difference within the organization. Or maybe you're one of those people who likes to criticize. Now we know we have a lot of those critics out there. So my suggestion to the critics is maybe you need to get up here and try to do it and see if you can do any better. This is really hard work being on the board of directors. I have to say that I've known several people over the last few years that really have poured heart, soul, and passion into trying to make sound, good decisions, and they've had a lot of criticisms. The problem is when not everybody's going to like everything that everybody does. But unfortunately, I think that people need to try to do it themselves. So I think that's one of the main reasons you should run for the board. I think that one, it's exciting, it's fun to make a difference, and I think the second is if you think that things could be better and you could probably help make a difference in the organization, then please step up and help us try and do that. So I'll talk to you about board watching. I know that it doesn't always work with everybody's schedule, but prior to annual conference and prior to the Leadership Summit, there is actually an open board meeting where you can go in and board watch. That's what they call it, board watching. So why should you? Well, let's be honest, this is your association. You should have a good idea about how it operates. It gives you a great way to understand the things that are coming before the board and the decisions that they have to make. This is your board. You elected them. When you board watch, you get to see how they think, right? Everybody gets to speak on different discussions. You get to hear different people's points of view. You get an idea of where the different perspectives are. It is absolutely the best way to stay informed about the issues facing the association. And obviously, it just gives you a better understanding of how it operates. So what's it like to be on the board? All right, it really is hard work. I don't want to make light of it. I can tell you that in the last few years, lots of the board members have not been sleeping well. But it is something where they work together. When a board reaches a decision, and I think this holds true in a unit, whether you agreed with the decision in the beginning or not, once that vote is passed and that decision is made, the board needs to be a united front. So we have to accept that while we go into these things maybe with differing opinions and differing perspectives, that once a decision is reached, it is indeed a consensus decision and everybody stands behind it. So, be a leader. SLA is really a great place to hone your leadership skills. Every single member is invited to step up and take the reins, working within that SLA government structure. Leadership has an enormous amount of benefits. I can tell you from my own personal experience, I have been active in SLA since 1988. It gave me an opportunity to work with difficult people. It gave me an opportunity to learn how to do program planning. I learned how to think strategically. And I'll be honest, I bring all of those skills back to my workplace. So I think that not only does it enrich you being a volunteer on your own level, but it also enhances your own skill set, and it is something that we carry with us wherever we go in terms of other opportunities in your jobs. So I will leave you with this last quote, or sorry, quote, comic. And as I said, I really do think it gives you a chance to show your workplace and the community what you can do and how you can make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for your volunteer time. I do have a couple of questions for you. So if you wouldn't mind bringing the slide with the org chart back up.
Absolutely. Let's see, I have to go all the way back. Yeah, I'll do it this way if that's okay. Bear with you.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm getting a recap. I kind of missed a few of those comics, too.
It was going too fast. I was hoping.
That's okay. You can go back to the first.
That one.
All right. So there's a question as to what is the difference between the caucuses that report into the chapter cabinet versus the caucuses that report into the boards of directors?
Sure. Okay, so like I said, I'll try and point. So the caucuses under the chapters is a brand new thing. And it was recently amended in the bylaws vote that membership participated in so that the chapters could set up geographic groupings that were not necessarily within their geographic area. So the idea was it was a way to bring people together within a geographic area without formally creating a formal chapter. So to create a chapter or a division within SLA, you basically need to petition that you want to create this unit. You would have to get 50 signatures and at least 5 people to step up to be officers. So caucuses are sort of the first step to make sure that there's an interested group of people and how do you bring them together. So it was a geographic way to bring people together. Versus the caucuses under the board are sort of, I want to say, more subject focused. So we have the baseball caucus. We have the retired members caucus. It was a way for these people to come together and meet without going through that process of becoming a formal division. So it also gives them one slot at programming. So the caucuses under the chapters don't get an official conference programming slot, but caucuses under the board of directors will get one slot at annual conference where they can convene their caucus. Does that answer that question, you think?
I think it does. Thank you.
Okay.
You actually touched on programming at the annual conference. Can you explain sort of how chapter and division cabinet programming at the annual conference works?
I sure can. I can start by telling you that chapters in general do not program for conference. So I'll talk about divisions second. The only thing I can tell you about chapters is chapters can often have a reception. So I know that the Canada chapters come together and they have a reception every year at conference, but they're not actually doing programming. Chapter programming is left to be done at the chapter level in their geographic region. So they don't really get formal programming slots at conference. Now the divisions are, on the other hand, pretty much have most of the programming control at the annual conference. So you have an annual conference advisory council that is an oversee committee of maybe, I can't remember if it's 5 or 6 people, who then convene all the divisions, and it's generally, some divisions it's the chair-elect, some it's the chair, some have an actual designated program planner, but each division has a representative that then goes to the annual advisory council planning meeting, and they plan their sessions for annual conference. So every division gets 10 slots, and then you're encouraged to partner with other divisions and to collaborate. You brainstorm on your ideas, you submit your abstracts, and then the annual advisory council, conference advisory council actually reviews all submissions. They may come back and ask 2 divisions to combine a session, they may kill a session, and they come back and tell you what sessions were approved. Now these 10 session slots include any networking events you might have. If you're holding your annual division business meeting at conference, that counts as a slot. If you have a section, those slots get counted as well. So that's how programming works at conference. Now SLA itself also offers sessions at conference that are not planned by the divisions, and you can usually tell this in the conference program. They're slated a little bit differently. It'll say something like SLA versus a specific division as a sponsor. One other highlight on the division programming, since you brought it up, is this year they've come up with something called master classes. So they're trying to be the more advanced level of session at the conference, and SLA, if they pick a division session to be a master class, they actually take up the cost of the audio-visual materials, which for many division planners is quite expensive.
So I think what's important for the audience here, and thank you for that explanation, Karen, I think for many of us, going to conference, we just assume that it all just kind of happens and we don't think about what goes into making conference happen. So what's nice is that this is a great way for those of you that are on the line that are thinking about volunteering, thinking about how you can add to your SLA community but aren't quite ready for a board role yet, or aren't really sure what kind of a committee to sit on. The annual conference within, whether it's through the CI division, through your local, another area that you're involved with, volunteering within the conference, or if you happen to be in Boston or Philadelphia next year, those are great areas and great ways for you to get involved and to get a little bit of taste of what volunteering and being in a leadership role within SLA is about. A couple more questions for you. One of your earlier slides was about how people who volunteer are more engaged. You talk about how it's exhausting, but it's good work and it's hard work. Why do you think typically people who volunteer become more engaged?
Well, I think because you become vested, right? I'm speaking from my own experience. I think you become more engaged in the association because, one, as a leader, you become intimately more aware of what goes on, how it gets accomplished. As Zena said, maybe most people don't realize all the work that goes into planning annual conference. I can tell you nothing more rewarding than planning conference. It was exciting to identify topics and deliver them and have people, because I'll be honest, the reason I stepped up to start with is I'd sat through a CE course, right, to sit through a session, and exactly what I showed you earlier, I could do better than this. I thought, this is lame. I want something that I want to go to, and that's why I stepped up. Thought, well, I can plan a better program. And so I became engaged because I found it exciting to know that I literally could make a difference. And I stayed mostly because I made some great friends and I got to do a lot of really exciting things.
That's great. Thank you, Karen. Another question is, at what point in your career do you think is the appropriate time for people to start volunteering?
Day one. I joined, I'll give you some history. So I was working at Bristol Myers Squibb, my first job out of library school, and I decided to go to my first SLA annual conference, and I'm not sure how I found out about it even. Met some of my other Bristol-Myers colleagues there and got involved in the pharmaceutical division. And I decided right then and there I wanted to be engaged with these group of people. I wanted to meet people working in other organizations like mine. I wanted to problem solve, learn, see what kinds of programming they could do. I think you could start sooner, start as a student. I think that the earlier in your career that you start volunteering, the more it's going to benefit your career. I'll tell a quick side story. I'm currently working in the government at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I 100% believe that I am in this job because of SLA. One year I was asked to give a CE course for the engineering division on standards. So I did a course on researching U.S. and international standards information. And in the course was a person from the National Institute of Standards and Technology who came up to me afterwards and said, you know, this was great. I follow your work that you, this time I was at Bureau Veritas. I get your bulletins. I think you're doing great work. And we connected and sort of became connected colleagues. So when I was laid off from Bureau Veritas many years later, she actually reached out to me in LinkedIn and said, you know, we have a project. Would you be interested in bidding on it? And I actually bid on the project. I had to go and do an RFQ. I was one of 3 people who bid. And I won the project, and I became a contractor for them. And ultimately, after 2 years of working with them, they offered me a permanent position. And I know for a fact I never would have gotten this connection if it hadn't been for SLA. Zena, you still there?
I am still here. Sorry, there are some other questions that were coming in.
Yeah, I can't see them. How come you can see them and I can't?
Because I have special panelist views.
I see that.
What is the function or purpose of the Public Policy Advisory Council?
Oh, boy. Well, I'm not probably the best person to speak to that. I can tell you that we are, this is a disclaimer, right, my opinion. I don't think that SLA is as active at the public policy level as somebody like ALA. But that's the point. It's to advocate sort of policy change at a more higher level. So perhaps maybe there was a copyright issue at Congress that had to do with something that we felt as a membership we wanted to put out a position on. That's the group that would work together to say, hey, this is coming, this is brewing in Congress, or this is out there, we should issue a statement, or we should submit comments. That is my understanding of what that Public Policy Committee does, or Advisory Council. So it's there to support staff. And Doug Newcomb, who heads that up at SLA staff.
Okay, we have a question for you about ideas to help grow your membership and what worked for you. This is from somebody who has 175 members in their chapter, and only about 25 attend any meeting. They're happy to have those 25, of course, but they'd like to see some fresh and new faces in their chapter events and would love some ideas on how to do that.
Well, I would have to see, I can't answer that without asking more questions. Is this a chapter that is geographically spread out over a large area, or is it a chapter that's pretty condensed to a small city? You know what I mean? So I come from the upstate New York chapter recently. Our chapter covered the entire state minus New York City. So it was a huge challenge to have meetings and get people from Albany and then 5 hours away from Buffalo. And now I'm in the DC chapter, and they have, I want to say, some kind of program every 2 weeks. Can that person type in whether they're small or large or where they are? They don't have to reveal who they are.
We will wait. While we wait for that, I have another question.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. That's okay. How do you get involved in those advisory councils that you were talking about? The person who asked this question has never heard of that and wants to know if you get involved by volunteering, or is it more of a networked type thing where you need to network more and get known so you're asked to sit on the council? It's
actually both. So what happens is, and I don't have the URL, but what happens every year is the incoming president is ready to come in. So let's say it's Jill Strand is our new president as of January. In the fall, they would have posted, and I did see it, a link that said, if you're interested in volunteering, click here. And it literally lets you submit what council or committee you're interested in serving on and put your name and data in. And it even for the units lets you capture, if you were, say, interested in being more active in the CI division, there is a place to capture that information as well. The other place to do this is just directly tell the president-elect that's coming in. So in this case right now, Tom Rink is our new president-elect. If you're interested in getting involved, send Tom an email. Say, Tom, I want to get involved. I want to sit on this council. I want to sit on this committee. And lastly, as you mentioned, the networking. Clearly, that's a way to do it. So if I'm the chair of the Public Relations Advisory Council and I'm looking for slots, and we only got maybe 3 people through the volunteer form on the SLA website, I'm going to look around and see who I think would be good in that role. So it is a combination of all 3, but I guarantee you, if you put your name in that form or you write the president-elect, you will most likely be tapped to do something.
So careful what you wish for. No. With busy jobs and careers and family obligations, with people who have limited time, do you think it's more effective to volunteer at the division level or in the chapter level?
I don't think it matters. I think that you volunteer based on what time you can give, and that's why, like I said, with the LM, the Leadership Management Division, I asked people to sit on committees and said, we're going to give you one task. I guarantee you won't take more than 1 hour a month of your time. And so it's really up to what you can do. If you're involved with the chapter, the thing with the chapter is there's some expectation that obviously you're going to go to the chapter events. The division stuff, you can be very active in a division. I have division members I've never met at annual conference or in person, but they have done enormous things like managing the discussion list. A lot of the division work can be done virtually, whereas a personal sense of the chapter work is it tends to require a little bit more in-person attendance to either chapter board meetings or chapter events. But I think it's about where your interests lie too. I've always been active in both just because I like learning with other people who are in my sort of subject matter area, but the chapter gives you that advantage of meeting people geographically close to you, which is always really nice.
Great. So there was just a comment on that chapters are the way that people find SLA, whereas divisions are sort of the way people find professional information. Going back to the earlier question about getting more people out to chapter events, this particular chapter is in one state, but people are reluctant to travel after work more than, say, 15 or 20 miles. They're wondering if maybe dine-arounds are a good idea. They've found that they've had to reduce in-person meetings from 6 a year to 4 a year just to curb costs and keep people together.
Great. That really helps me. So, yeah, so let me tell you, so again, my experience with the Upstate New York chapter was exactly that. We had about 150 members statewide, and we found the way to get a mass at a meeting was literally we reduced our programs to 2 a year, but they were full-day programming. So instead of trying to do an hour program at night where people don't want to drive or something, where it might be after work, we would say this is a full day of professional development. Spend the money, come and spend the entire day on a particular topic. And we found that we would normally get between 50 and 60 people per those programs. We were conscious of that we were spread out, and so we would move them around the state. So maybe one year it was in Albany, and then we do spring and fall. So in fall it was in Albany, and then maybe spring it was in Syracuse, which was the middle. Maybe in the next year we'd have it in Buffalo. We know that we always got more different people depending on where we moved it, but then there also was a core group of people who would make that 5-hour trek for that full-day programming. We tried the whole dine around or what we called local area meetings. And again, depends what your goal is. If it's just to sort of connect and meet people and chat, they're great. We did some local library tours. We did some local dine-around type things, or a dinner, or a happy hour. But then you're really going to get maybe 10, 15 people. If you're looking for mass, I might suggest reducing your programs even more and extending them to be a full day. As far as getting people to join, one of the great things to do is to reach out to if you could figure out a way to get your programs onto other lists. So let's say there's a law library list or a medical library list or some other geographic. So in New York, we had the Upstate and New York and Ontario chapter of the Medical Library Association. One year we even did a joint program with them, and we really got a great turnout. So if you could partner with another association or try to attract members from another type of organization or association, we also did stuff for students. We had a full-day program where we did resume building and student presentations and all that type of stuff. That's a great way to build your membership, is to get the students to join early on. So those are just some suggestions.
Those are great. Thank you. Particularly the full day idea is resonating with people. So thank you.
Yeah, it really worked. Yeah.
Given that you're far more networked into SLA than I am, do you have any ideas with regard to whether or not chapters are doing virtual meetings as part of their regular schedule?
I know that some of them are, for sure. For example, I know the DC chapter has virtual meetings. I can tell you when I was in upstate New York, we did do one or two. And I know the best place to find that out is SLA is maintaining a master calendar that has encouraged all units to, whenever they have a webinar or a program, to list that in the calendar. So you should be able to go to that calendar and see what's going on, what's virtually available out there.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be the end of our questions for now.
Well, that was good.
But yeah, it was great. And there's just another request to have the org charts shared with the chapters. The Competitive Intelligence Division will make this presentation available via our website, of course, assuming Karen's okay with that.
I am fine.
But of course, if Karen, I think you said you had talked to some people at headquarters about.
Yeah, we would really like to see it on the website, so I will follow up with that.
That's great. Thank you for that. And thank you in general, Karen, for your time and your great suggestions. I think it certainly motivates a lot of, well, it motivated me, and I think it motivates a lot of people. I hope it motivates a lot of people on the line to take an active role in SLA. If anyone on the line is interested in being involved with the Competitive Intelligence Division, we're always looking for volunteers, whether it's for the conference, to sit on our membership committee, our vendor relations committee, social media. We're always looking for web content as well if you just want to write, if you're more of that blogging type, or you have some thoughts around competitive intelligence and SLA and how the two work together. We're happy to have you involved. If you're interested in running for the board next year, our chair-elect is Lynn Strand, and she'd be happy to put you on our slate for 2016. If you're interested in hearing more about SLA and leadership, there will be a leadership recap in about 13 minutes, actually, at 1 p.m., where our treasurer, John DiGilio, as well as a few others from, I think, Jill Strand, will be speaking as well. And finally, a plug for some more competitive intelligence content. Join us on March the 19th at 1 p.m. Our guest webinar speaker will be Rajiv Johal, who is a professor at Concordia University. And he'll be talking about using social media in competitive intelligence research. Promotions will be sent out by email shortly, so when you get the link, please register, and then you'll go out through all of the typical CID channels, i.e. Twitter and email. Again, if you are not a member of the Competitive Intelligence Division, so you're missing out on these great websites, please do join us, and then you will get the emails as well. And then you can take care of the great sessions. Again, thank you to Karen for her time, and thank you to Aurora WDC for hosting our webinar series. And with that, I wish you all great volunteerism in 2015, and go forth and don't be afraid to be a leader. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thanks, Zena. Bye-bye.
Bye.